At the IEEE Vehicular Technology Conference, there is a workshop, the second workshop, on optical wireless communication. Wireless communication for 6G. And I'll be presenting a paper there on design considerations for sectorization. And as it is about standardization, we may not only be interested in how to boost the bitrate and to make optical wireless communication as fast as possible, but also on how to ensure that systems are interoperable, that they can work together, that we understand how to optimally design it, to transfer the knowledge to each other and to other people who are also designing communication systems. And quite often, insights from radio communication are being used in optical wireless communication. But that could be tricky, and it could lead to misleading results that are different in radio communication and optical communication. And the example that I like to give here is if a radio link is a bit weak and the signals are somewhere down in the noise, you can improve that a lot by making the antenna directional, by sending the power in the direction where you want to have it. So a gain at the transmitter helps in improving the signal-to-noise ratio. But a gain at the receiver also helps, and it helps in the same way to improve the signal-to-noise ratio. But the main message that I have today is, in optical wireless communication, that could be very different. Directionality at the transmitter has other consequences than directionality at the receiver. And in this presentation, I would like to give you examples of that and gives you some considerations for how to design an optical communication system in the best way. Now assume that we have a certain coverage area. And if we split that area into smaller segments, into smaller sectors, and I just send the optical power in the direction where I want to have it, let's say in just one of these sectors, then the optical power in that sector goes up by a factor of n. Because I can just collimate and steer all the power right there in that sector. That means in the photodiode that also the current goes up by a factor of n. But the signal-to-noise ratio is proportional to the square of the signal that I'm receiving. So my signal-to-noise ratio goes up by a factor of n squared. If I do that sectorization at the transmitter. So at the transmitter it is highly beneficial to do sectorization. Does it work in the same way if I have a directional receiver? Do I also have the n-square effect on the signal-to-noise ratio? And the lesson of our investigation is, it is not. So let's start to consider a single die of an area APD, the area of the photodiode, and it just has one sector. It looks into the entire coverage area. So n here is equal to 1. And that works very well. I can make the area of the photodiode quite large and I can capture a lot of photons such that the received signal-to-noise ratio goes up by a squared, because the number of photons is proportional to a, the current is proportional to this area, and the signal-to-noise ratio to a squared. But there is a catch. And that catch is that the larger I make that photodiode area, the larger its capacitance is. So it acts as a capacitor, and that limits the bandwidth. And restricting the bandwidth could be detrimental to the throughput that I'm getting. So we could think of a solution of having collimators. We split up the photodiode, in this example, in 4 areas, and each of these photodiodes has its own collimator. But that means that I need 4 of these collimators together in the device, in the box. So the total optical area is 4 times larger than the area of one segment. And if I just say that on the device what is limiting the size is the hole in the box, the total area. So if I have a limit to the optical area on which my photons fall in and I split that by having n sectors, then I have to divide the effective area by n optical. And that means that the signal to noise ratio goes down with n squared. But I don't need to use this facet eye detector. I don't need to use collimators. I don't need to have the non-imaging insect eye kind of thing that is on the right here. We can also do something that is very similar to what our human eye does. We have a lens, we have detectors, and these detectors have pixels. Now all the light on the entire lens is focused on one single point on a detector. So if I split the detector, I can use the full area of the lens, and optical in this case is equal to 1. But I can still pixelate the detector. So there I can have many detectors that are small, that have a large bandwidth, and that still capture all the light. So that imaging system is pretty attractive. So what does that mean for the signal to noise ratio? Well, the larger the area that I want to cover, the lower the signal to noise ratio, because I have to spread all my photons over the area. And it goes with a square, because it's optical power that I'm spreading over the area. However, if I sectorize, I can boost my signal to noise ratio with NTX squared. In the receiver, it works differently. I like to make the area of the detector, the optical size of the lens, as large as possible, because then I can collect many photons. Many photons means that the current is proportional to the area and the signal to noise ratio proportional to the square of that area. But if I start to split the lens by having many tiny collimators like the insect eye has, then I have to divide by the number of detectors there. So sectorizing at the receiver may not be very helpful. But if we do that in the non-imaging way. Now, the signal to noise ratio is something that I like to reference at the output of the transimpedance amplifier, because most of the noise in these systems comes from the amplifier. So signal to noise ratio is also proportional to the TI gain divided by the noise, and of course is proportional to the total optical power phi that I'm transmitting here. A problem with transimpedance amplifiers is that they can equalize the signal response. They can undo the effect of the capacitance of the photodiode. But quite often that comes with an increase of the noise, particularly at high frequencies. So the noise is initially flat, that's the first term in the denominator, and then it goes up dramatically with bandwidth squared in the second term. And quite often we want to communicate at high bit rates, high bandwidth, such that that 1 plus is relatively small. And then the combined effects of bandwidth comes in cube. So we have a large effect of that bandwidth. The interesting terms here are that the area of the photodiode is in the denominator, because that area is restricting the bandwidth, and in order to compensate for that, I get a lot more noise. So that APD squared in the denominator comes from the effect of the boost of the noise if we want to equalize the response. So overall, the signal to noise ratio is helped a lot by sectorizing at the transmitter. It's pretty tricky to do the sectorization at the detector. Yes, we like to split the photodiode, but preferably not by using only a part of the optical area, so an imaging system is better. All in all, these trade-offs and design considerations are very different from the transmitter at the receiver. So if we talk about standardization, an important aspect is, can we give designers the freedom to make a different choice for the number of sectors at the transmitter and at the receiver? So what I've seen before is having a VCSEL array or many emitters, many micro LEDs emitting into different directions, which helps a lot in terms of boosting the signal to noise ratio. You can implement that by measuring the angle towards the counter station by a detector that is also highly sectorized. The question is, do we want that? Do we want to perfectly align the emitter with the receiver? In a production process, that is not a very attractive solution. You would like to decouple that. And a topic that I'm debating in detail in the paper is how can we solve that? How can we decouple the number of segments of sectors at the transmitter from the number of segments at the receiver? And there is a way of doing that. But we need a little bit of help from the counter station. The precise detail with using codes in different sectors and how to detect that in a very efficient way, using only very small amounts of signal processing power. That is something where we made a smart design using Walsh-Hadamard codes, using linear feedback shift register codes, and that can be detected in a very tiny processor. It worked well. And with the regards from my co-authors, I would like to invite you to read that paper and see how we solved that problem. I'm Jean-Paul Linnartz, now with TU Eindhoven, used to be with Signify. Also Paul van Voorthuisen used to be with Signify, but is now with NXP. And David Rojas is in Signify, the place where quite a bit of this work has been done. All in all, there we describe how to build a system where we give designers the freedom to choose the number of segments at the transmitter and at the receiver, and not having to manufacture that together. And I think in terms of going for standardization, these aspects are also very important. I'd like to see you in Oslo if you want to listen to my talk live.